Thank you so much for this opportunity to join you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about the vital role the public health community can and must play in the ongoing negotiations toward a binding and ambitious global plastic treaty. In recent years, the world has awoken to the widespread and rapidly growing environmental impacts of plastic pollution, including on our global climate. Yet the profound implications of plastic pollution for human health, for global public health, have received far less attention and even less action. The ongoing negotiations of the Global Plastic Treaty create both the unique opportunity and the urgent necessity to close the gap, both on awareness and critically on action. Accordingly, they create the vital need for the public health community to engage actively in both the negotiations and the growing global public discourse on the life cycle impacts of plastics and appropriate responses to those impacts. CL is committed to helping you do that. The plastic pollution that first garnered headlines and drove documentaries was plastic waste plainly and painfully visible in oceans, coastlines, and waterways around the world. As you've heard, that includes the cigarette filters that are not only a deceptive marketing tool for tobacco, but the single most prevalent plastic waste found in our environment and a direct source of plastic inhalation. But that pollution has another more insidious dimension when it comes to human health. The public health community has worked for decades to better understand, trace, and reduce toxic exposures and their impacts. Decades of evidence have shown that plastic products carry an array of known or potentially hazardous substances. In recent years, evidence has mounted that these exposures are more pervasive, more persistent, and more pernicious than previously realized. As all plastic produced and used continually sheds microscopic fibers, particles, and dust, contamination by tiny plastic particles, micro and nanoplastics, is becoming pervasive in the global environment. Microplastics rain from the sky on remote mountaintops. They contaminate urban areas and pristine high altitude lakes alike. They are omnipresent in homes, offices, laboratories, in the room where I'm sitting now, and in the one where you're sitting. They are in the air we breathe and in the breaths we take. The smallest particles will be carried deep into our lungs. In 2022, researchers found microplastics were in 85% of human lung tissues they sampled. They identified a dozen different plastic polymers in our lungs: polypropylene, polyethylene, PET, PVC, resins. We ingest another million plastic particles a year from the airborne plastics that rain onto our food and our food service items, where they join still more plastics we ingest, sources too numerous to count. Microplastic particles have been found in drinking water from around the world, including both public water sources and bottled water. They are found in agricultural soils and in food crops grown in those soils, in fish and shellfish that provide livelihoods and vital nutrition for populations around the world, in the meat and milk of farm animals, in honey, salt, beer. And just as these plastics are found in our lungs, they've also been found in the human digestive tract, in our blood, in our cells, in amniotic fluids. But while plastic pollution is pervasive, as you've heard today, it is not natural. All of it, every particle is human made. This fact both magnifies and compounds its impacts on human health and points the way toward dramatically reducing those impacts. The plastic particles carried into our bodies, in our air, food, and water are Trojan horses. More than 10,000 chemicals have been identified in plastic production. Of these, 2,400 meet one or more of the EU's criteria: persistence, bioaccumulation, and toxicity, including hormone disruptors, potent neurotoxins, and a wide array of carcinogens. For most of the remaining 7,600 substances, their toxicity has not been properly assessed or publicly disclosed. Yet these substances can readily leach out of plastics and into human bodies. Plastics are also a vector for other toxins they readily absorb from the environment, including heavy metals, persistent organic pollutants, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. In the language of public health, the plastic contamination in our bodies is not a single insult, but many, some known, most unknown, all continuously interacting with each other, with our bodies, with our hormones, and our genomes. As a result, we are in the midst of a population scale human experiments on the effects of pervasive plastic pollution and chemical contamination on the human body, both within and across generations. Every one of us, each new baby born, each one conceived, we are all test subjects. But for those living where plastics are mined, made, discarded, incinerated, the tests have been more sustained and much more acute, and the results are clear. The production, transport, use, disposal, and environmental leakage of plastics pose profound risks for human health across the entire plastic life cycle. These are risks with which the global public health community has long experience, relevant missions, and unique expertise. Extracting the fossil fuels from which most plastics are made releases toxic and hazardous pollutants into the air sheds and fresh water supplies where oil, gas, and coal are produced. Spills of plastic feedstocks and precursors from pipelines and transport corridors expose unsuspecting, unprepared, and largely unprotected civilian populations to sometimes catastrophic chemical and toxic risks. And nowhere are these risks more pervasive, more sustained, or more severe than in the frontline and fence line communities where fossil fuel feedstocks converted into plastics and plastic additives. These communities are consistently exposed to high levels of hazardous air and water pollutants and frequent accidental or unplanned releases of toxins into their environment. As a result, in communities around the world where plastics and petrochemicals are produced, documented health outcomes are consistently poorer than in equivalent communities without those industries. These communities experience high rates of asthma, bronchial diseases, neurological and developmental impacts, and cancers of many kinds. Critically, toxic releases continue long after the useful economic lives of the plastics themselves, lifetimes, as you've heard today, that too often are measured in moments, minutes, or at best, months. The vast majority of waste plastic ends up accumulating in landfills where toxic fires threaten the lives and health of waste pickers. It's burned in incinerators, releasing toxic ash and gases into surrounding communities. Or it's released into the environment where it creates an array of additional human and environmental health hazards. Even the roughly 5% of plastics currently being recycled contribute to these toxic releases, both through the recycling processes themselves, often conducted in uncontrolled and unsafe conditions, and through the perpetuation and concentration of chemical risks in many recycled plastics. If plastic production, use, and disposal continue growing on their current trajectory, their human health impacts will grow along with them. But because plastics are human-made, we have other, better choices. We can choose a different path. We must stop the growth in plastic production, quickly eliminate the least necessary and most harmful plastics, including, for example, cigarette filters, and phase out virgin plastic production over time. We must ensure that plastic production is safer everywhere, beginning with the frontline and fence line communities where plastics are made. This means stronger human health and human rights controls over plastic production itself. In order to be truly reusable and truly circular, plastics products that remain in the economy must be safe. And this demands that plastics be free of toxins that would make them unsafe to use or unsafe to recycle. And this, in turn, demands that governments require greater transparency and disclosure about the chemicals that are in plastics. It demands a treaty that places the protection of public health over the protection of business secrets. And it requires eliminating all solutions like incineration that purport to address plastic pollution, but simply turning it into air and water pollution. The Global Plastics Treaty must be comprehensive, It must be ambitious. It must be binding, and it must be safe. And for all those reasons, it needs the voices, vision, mission, mandates, and expertise of the global public health community. The negotiations need you. They need all of us together.